Whoever was responsible for the weather, thank you. It is a great evening. It's warm out, and I hope this is a sign that spring is gone and summer is coming, and more than just visiting. It is really nice to be here, and I want to thank Roxanne for such a warm invitation to join you this evening, and for your dedication and leadership as a part of the Sister City Yerevan organization. I was just saying to a young lady that we have about 6 sister cities in Cambridge. This is by far, I believe, the oldest, but the strongest. The strongest. So please give yourself a hand for that, because you've done a wonderful job. And you sort of raise the bar, but you also give us a good shining example of what sister city relationships can be. And in these times that are somewhat trying, the idea of a sister city relationship it's wonderful. So I am just really honored to be here, surrounded by many friends who helped build and sustain the remarkable partnership between our 2 cities. 39 years ago, and I'm not barely over 25 myself, but 39 years ago, that's how long Cambridge and Yerevan have been sister cities. A relationship that began during one of our most challenging periods. It was really, I want to say, the most challenging period in recent history. The height of the Cold War, when City Councilor, how many folks remember Frank Duhay? Mr. Heck, I knew you would. Excellent. It was Frank Duhay who led the pioneering delegation to Yerevan in 1986. And when we formalized our Sister City Agreement in 1987, few could imagine the profound and lasting impact this partnership would have. And it's very interesting, and I wish I could have found it before I got here. So we're doing some, I call it urban renewal at City Hall. If you go up to the rafters of City Hall, it's very scary, very dirty, and if you were to make a spark, the place would go up in flames. And so we're in the process of cleaning up. And you know what I found? I found the original agreement. And I meant to bring it, and so I apologize, but I will make it available so we all can share it. And what we're trying to do at City Hall is have display cases in our hallways so people can see what we do. I was a little dismayed to see that this wonderful document that spoke about this wonderful relationship was in the attic collecting dust. So we're going to bring it downstairs and try to put it in a really nice case so that whoever comes into City Hall, they are reminded of the fact that the City Hall is the people's house. Wherever you come from, however you found yourself here, whether you live here or you're just visiting, we want people to have a sense of belonging. So I'll have to tell everyone when I find that and get it in the case so we can have a little reception in City Hall. But what makes the CYSCA truly special is that it represents the best of citizen diplomacy. And it says what citizen diplomacy can actually achieve. While governments negotiate from positions of power, you, the members of this association, chose to build bridges of friendship, a shared humanity. You have proven that peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of a connection. Over nearly 4 decades, the Cambridge-Yerevan Sister City Association has facilitated hundreds of exchanges. I remember I think one of the times when I was mayor, we had teachers come for Yerevan. And this wasn't the first time, but I just happened to be mayor at the time, and that was extraordinary. So I know these exchanges have involved students and teachers, artists, scientists, business leaders, city officials. You supported Armenian schools and community organizations. You've brought Armenian culture through exhibits and concerts and educational programs into our city. But perhaps most importantly, You've shown that the bonds between people transcend political boundaries. So tonight, we're fortunate to hear from Dr. Alan Hendrickson, whose expertise in educational diplomacy speaks directly to the work that you do. Dr. Hendrickson understands, as you do, that education is one of the most powerful tools for building lasting peace and mutual understanding between nations and people. So as we look forward into the future, the Cambridge-Yerevan Sister City Association's mission remains as relevant as ever, maybe even more relevant than ever. In our interconnected yet often divided world, your model of grassroots diplomacy builds on personal relationships, cultural exchange, and genuine partnerships. And it offers hope and practical pathways forward. So on behalf of the City of Cambridge, I want to thank each member of the Cambridge Sister City, Cambridge-Yerevan Sister City Association, the past members and present, for your dedication to this vital work. You've made our city richer, more connected to the world, and truer to our values of openness and international friendship. As you continue this important work, know that you have the full support of the Cambridge City government, and together, we will ensure that the friendship between Cambridge and Yerevan continues to flourish for generations to come. So in this bag, I have a proclamation. I know you're going to a trip to Yerevan. I am sorry that I'm not going. I'm going to try not to pout. But I did leave a small token of our appreciation and a token of our diplomatic international friendship that I hope that you will take with you. It has a proclamation, it has a challenge coin, and I think when I think of a challenge coin, I think of how we are challenged to continue those bonds and that they never be broken. And then there's a key to our city. Now this is the thing about the key to the city. It may not open very many doors because the real estate's a little expensive here, but think of it as the key to our hearts. So thank you, congratulations on 39 years of building bridges and fostering peace. And if I were ever to give this organization a name or define it as a quote, it would be, if every hand that reached could touch. Thank you for reaching.
Relationships between Cambridge and Yerevan. So we thought it would be appropriate for us to give you this book about the city of Yerevan. And lots of photographs and text. And including the ones who come through, yes.
Thank you so very much. This is my pleasure. And when you come by the city's hall, hopefully we'll have the case ready, and I'll make sure this is in it. So thank you so very much.
So Alan Hendrickson is Lee E. Dirks Professor of Diplomatic History Emeritus and the founding director of Diplomatic Studies at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, where he's taught American diplomatic history, contemporary U.S.-European relations, and the history, theory, and practice of diplomacy. He has served as Fulbright Professor at the I'm going to have to fudge this, Diplomatische Akademie in Vienna and at the College of Europe in Bruges. He's also taught at the Foreign Affairs University in Beijing and other institutions around the world. including Moscow State Institute of International Relations in Russia. He's had a long-standing educational relationship with students from Armenia, both at the Fletcher School and in Armenia itself. He's given special courses a number of times in the Armenian Ministry Training Program sponsored by the late Aso Tavitian for mid-career officials and others, known as Tavitian Scholars from Armenia. In May 2006, he traveled in a Fletcher School delegation, including Aso Tavitian that was led by Joyce Barsam to Yerevan. There he spoke about the United States, the Euro-Atlantic Alliance, and the South Caucasus on a panel held at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For the School of Political Science and International Affairs at the American University of Armenia, he delivered a lecture on the subject, The Large Diplomacy of Small States. We're honored to have Alan Henriksen here to address us, and please welcome the professor.
Your Worship, Mayor Simmons, President Akhmetian, and members of the Cambridge-Yerevan Sister Cities Association. I've really been looking forward to this. It means a lot. As your president has said, I've had quite a long-standing relationship over many years with Armenians here in the U.S., in Cambridge, in Greater Cambridge in particular, and in Armenia itself. I do have some more or less prepared remarks. I don't have an actual text to read, but if you'll indulge me, I would like, if I may, to sort of follow along with some thoughts that I have put down on paper, which I'd like to share with you. The topic that is announced that I chose in consultation with your president is educational diplomacy, and it has a subtitle, my Armenian experience and my American experience, and for me this is a dual experience, and it's a blended one. Because in Armenia, I was very much aware of the American presence, met a number of Americans there, including some who were in the party that I traveled with. And here in America, especially in Boston, the Boston area, the greater Boston area, I've met many Armenians over the years, some of whom have become very close family friends. The main topic that I've chosen and will speak about is educational diplomacy. There's really no standard definition of that anywhere that I'm aware of. So I've given it a little bit of thought. And if you'll forgive the professor in me, I would like to share a few, I wouldn't say necessarily learned points about the subject, but to indicate to you what I've been thinking about in relation to that subject, which I have never really thought about expressly before. I think of educational diplomacy as having three levels, and the highest is not necessarily the most important one. But the first level that I think of, I would call the normative international level. And that refers to the framework of the international or world order that has a bearing on the subject of education. And there are two international instruments, one of them actually an organization, which has a direct and explicit bearing on this subject. And I would like, if I may, to share a bit of this with you. I think even many of my professional colleagues at the Fletcher School are not entirely aware of it, and I wasn't myself fully either. UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, was formed in 1945, when, of course, the United Nations itself was formed. And in Article 1 of its Constitution, which includes a statement of its purposes and functions, it has the words, "The purpose of the organization is to contribute to peace and security by promoting collaboration among the nations through education, science, and culture in order to further universal respect for justice, for the rule of law, and for the human rights and fundamental freedoms which are affirmed for the peoples of the world without distinction of race, sex, language, or religion by the Charter of the United Nations. To realize this purpose, the organization will, and this is what pertains to education, give fresh impulse to popular education and to the spread of culture. By collaborating with members at their request in the development of educational activities, by instituting collaboration among the nations to advance the ideal of equality of educational opportunity without regard to race, sex, or any distinctions, economic or social, and by suggesting educational methods best suited to prepare the children of the world for the responsibilities of freedom. That, I think, is very important, and that, for me, is part of the normative framework within which educational diplomacy is conducted. I would like to cite as well a brief passage, Article 26 from the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It's quite strong. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least at the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. Article 26 also states, education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. And then it adds, this is quite interesting, parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. That's quite interesting, actually, and I wonder how that is actually developed. So that is what I would call the normative level of what educational diplomacy is. Again, not necessarily the most important. A second level I will call the formal national. In the United States, I think of the Fulbright program. As Roxana mentioned, I've been involved in the Fulbright program a couple of times in Vienna and also in Bruges at the College of Europe. Your organization, as has been mentioned and is noted in your minutes, has been very actively involved in the Open World Congressional Legislative program, about which I frankly was not very familiar, and we talked about it yesterday on the phone. And I hope that will continue, despite some of the cutbacks in funding for education and some of the attacks on local universities, including one particular one in your city, Madam Mayor. So at the formal level, there are programs like the Fulbright program, which is probably undergoing a bit of pressure right now in terms of its funding. The Open World Congressional Legislative Program, which is congressionally financed and supported according to our separation of powers system. And then the third level, again, the lowest maybe, but not the least important by any means, the local organizational level. And what you were doing, CYSCA, I didn't know how to pronounce it, but I'll use that as a kind of a shorthand for the Cambridge-Yerevan Sister Cities Association. The support programs that you have, particularly I think of the Armenia Schools program, with a focus on particular schools, specific ones in Armenia itself, that really can make a difference. And the Fletcher School itself, as has been mentioned, has a program sponsored by the late Aso Tavidian, the Scholars Program, which is more formally called the Advanced Training Program for public service. Now, educational diplomacy, which I've mentioned in fairly formalistic terms, has certain common characteristics. One is an emphasis on freedom of thought and expression. Freedom of thought and expression. Another characteristic of educational diplomacy is a search for knowledge achieved through scientific method and through discourse, maybe even a search for the truth, whatever that might mean in various ways. But it also means, and this I think of partly because, like a lot of you, I studied Latin at one point, the word education comes from a Latin word meaning to lead, to educare, to lead out, to draw out, to bring forth. So a teacher and anyone involved in education is aspiring to bring out the talent, not necessarily genius, but genius in the sense of the spirit of the individual person. So to achieve the full development of the individual at every level. That is also part of what I think of as being educational diplomacy. I would add about it that it's a mutual process. It's reciprocal. I surely have learned as much from the students I have taught over the years as I have taught them, in my own subject, and I would like to think maybe even a bit more broadly than that. Educational diplomacy, like education generally and specifically, is premised on the sovereignty of the individual. And in that respect, it corresponds with the international system of the sovereign equality and independence of states. That's the diplomacy involved, because international educational diplomacy does involve, after all, transactions and connections across national borders, in some cases across extensive distances. So thank you for indulging me in speaking about this in somewhat conceptual terms. Now, if I may speak about it, my own experience in Armenia and in America with regard to these two cultures, connected cultures, blended cultures, in a somewhat more personal way. It's been mentioned that I did travel to Armenia. I've only done it once. It was in May of 2006. The trip was sponsored by Aso Tavidian. I don't know whether you are fully aware of the biography of this really interesting man. I won't attempt to repeat it all. He was born in Bulgaria, actually, communist country at the time. He went to school in a Christian school in Beirut. And he told me, as I'm sure he told many others, but I remember he's telling me in conversation once, with regard to his philanthropy, which was extensive, he said he discovered, after he had been a student at the school that he attended in Beirut, that a member of the faculty had been paying his tuition without his knowing it. And the example of that obviously profoundly affected Aso. He never had children himself, and I'm sure I am not alone in thinking that the Tibetan scholars whom he supported over the years, and there are several hundreds of them now, were in a sense his children. So his education interest and his interest in supporting young people derives, I think, from the experience that he had, his very grateful experience when he was a child in Beirut. He went to Columbia University, studied nuclear physics actually, founded a company called SyncSort for sorting. I'm not sure, I can't explain exactly what it did. And he became a very significant art collector of art, as you probably know. Much of his collection has been given to the Clark Museum in Western Massachusetts, And when he passed away recently, there was an extraordinary article in the New York Times and other publications about the range and variety of the paintings that he collected. He had a particular interest in portraiture, and he gave to me and my late wife, Pam, a beautiful book of portraits that he collected that were shown in a particular exposition at the Clark Museum on that subject. The trip, we flew in Air France. There are quite a few Armenians in France, as you probably know. I don't think that's why we flew Air France, but when we were passing through France, through Paris and beyond, I remember having a discussion with Asa Tavidian about, among other things, how many people who are well known for achievement in various fields are in fact Armenian or have an Armenian background. Charles Aznavour, I knew about him. I did not know, as maybe you do, but I had not known. I learned this actually from Ruben Shugarian, who was the first ambassador of the newly independent Republic of Armenia in the United States and then taught at Fletcher, that Michel Legrand, the composer, had an Armenian background. His mother's father was Armenian, and he was very, very proud of that. Well, it was a long flight, and we talked about all kinds of fields in science and politics and art and literature, and there were so many I had not known had Armenian background. And it became a kind of a running joke among us, not just between the two of us, but the entire group, that of course it's Armenian, if it's good. An absolutely delightful man. The trip was actually organized by Dr. Joyce Barsom, a Tufts alumna, a member of the board of Tufts University, a member of the board of advisors at the Fletcher School. And she was the one who organized the trip. And she kept our focus the entire time on the subject of education. That was the purpose of the trip, to develop, to foster, to strengthen an educational relationship between the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University more generally, and educational institutions, and also governmental institutions in the Armenian Republic. She never let us forget that that's what our purpose was. And sometimes that reassurance of hers was necessary. Now, what we did in Armenia was quite varied. We stayed at the Hotel Yerevan, which perhaps others here have done. In some ways, the city was not unlike Cambridge. There was a very interesting place called, if I recall correctly, Art Bridge, a bookstore and a coffee shop very nearby, which I went to a couple of times. I don't speak Armenian, but I had this, I should mention as well that along on this trip was Ambassador Stephen Bosworth, our dean, and his wife Christine. And I had this, as Steve Bosworth called it, a cheat sheet with Armenian phrases. And I learned the numbering system. And I could ask for the key at the hotel. I think I remember Chors Haryor 400. I don't remember what Das Namek. I think that was the rest of it. What is it? 11. Okay. I could stay at any hotel in Armenia and ask for the key as long as it was 411. We had a lot of fun with that. I learned a few other words as well. More seriously, we visited the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The meeting was held in the Tavidian Library that also had given support to establish a library at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right in the middle of the city. The foreign minister at the time was Vartan Oskanian, former student of mine, and a very good friend to this day. Each of us gave a talk about the subject that was mentioned, including the South Caucasus, on the panel. And of course, there have been a lot of events there, a lot of unfortunate ones since. We went to the Central Bank, which was a very impressive institution. Quite a few of the Tividian scholars at Fletcher over the years have come from the Central Bank. They are very well trained and obviously very, very highly intelligent people. I think it was a Sunday morning where we had this. We were impressed that they would come out on Sunday morning to meet with us. It might have been Saturday, but I think it was actually Sunday. We also went to the president's office. We didn't meet the president, but we did meet his top advisor. And for me, and I think for my colleagues from Fletcher, it was a kind of reality check. Because as I've said, Joyce Barson was keeping a focus on education, what the Fletcher School, what Tufts University could offer. Well, the president's advisor, I think he was probably a trained economist, said that when he thinks of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, he thinks international relations. And he said, he implied, what we really need, and I remember he was using the phrase, hardcore economists. That is, those who maybe graduated from, say, the University of Chicago, in economics, the departments that produced Nobel Prize winners in that subject. That was a little bit sobering, actually. But it was not a bad thing to hear that, actually. It was a sort of a challenge, actually, a word which you have used with regard to the challenge coin. As was mentioned, I think it's mentioned in the note, the little bio note, we also visited the American University of Armenia. I first learned about that from a woman named Salpi Galasian. And some of you may know, she was prominently featured in a PBS program a year or so ago about Glendale and some parts of the city of Los Angeles that have a large Armenian community. I think she is directing, probably still is, a program on Armenian studies at the University of Southern California. She was a very good friend, is a very good friend of Artan Askanyan, was one of the ones who helped set up his Civilitas Foundation in Yerevan. Well, at the American University of Armenia, Asa Davidian spoke. Dean Bosworth spoke very impressively, and I spoke as well, and my topic was, as is mentioned, the large diplomacy of small states. And what I probably mentioned was, for one thing, there are a lot of small countries in the world, and at the United Nations, which according to its charter, every country, every state is sovereign and equal and has an equal vote in the General Assembly. So the small states, the islands of the Caribbean, the South Pacific, of Europe, Armenia, some of them from the former USSR, those really add up to a majority that can express the opinion of mankind. Another way in which small states have had a large influence, and I think more particularly not so much of Armenia, although its security situation is maybe exemplary because of the certain vulnerability there, but mainly the vulnerability of small states like the small island developing states in the Caribbean or the Pacific that are quite low, to sea level. They have raised the consciousness of the world with regard to the challenge of global warming in a way that large states like Canada, the US, China, Russia, couldn't really possibly do. And then something a bit more specific regarding Armenia itself, and it's arguably even a bit controversial. And it has to do with the subject of, well, broadly human rights, but more specifically genocide. I am not as deeply aware of that subject as I'm sure probably all of you are, but I know quite a bit about it. The Henry Morgenthau report. I do teach diplomatic history and cannot be anything but mindful of that. I had read shortly before the trip a book by Peter Balakian called The Burning Tigress, which some of you probably know, which is really full of information. But what I said in a somewhat challenging way, I think I felt a little bit bold about it at the time, was that Armenia and Armenians have an obligation, I think, in the larger field of human rights to, I wouldn't say identify with, but in emphasizing their own experience, to be supportive of and attentive to the experience of other groups. I could mention a lot of them, but now there are increasingly many of them in places like Darfur, the Rohingyas, and many, many others as well. That imposes, I think, a kind of a special moral burden which Armenia, the Armenian community, the diaspora generally has. But it's a sort of a mission, and it's really important, and not every country can do it. Not every state means something. America means something. Armenia means something. And that is, I think, part of what I meant by the large diplomacy of small states. And that's what I spoke about there. We did visit, of course, the Armenian Genocide Memorial. I looked up this afternoon, I tried to figure out how to pronounce Tsitser-Nakabird. Is that somewhat close? I guess that's the Armenian name of the very impressive Armenian Genocide Memorial at the top of the cascade. That evening, we attended a musical performance at the base of the cascade. And I sat, I must admit, rather proudly next to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vartan Oskanian, for that performance. And the music was really good. The soprano was particularly good. And I remember recommending, I'm not sure to whom, but afterward, that she'd be invited to be one of the singers for the annual Armenian Night at Pops in Boston, which I was the privilege to attend. You know, maybe she has been invited, but in any case, it was an extraordinary performance. We visited Etchmiadzin. In a way, it was described colloquially as the Armenian Vatican. It was a service. The Catholicos was there. If this is being recorded, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will anyway. Dean Bosworth, Ambassador Bosworth, is a very tall man, quite formal, and we were all seated on one side during the service. And I was seated very properly, you know, with my legs in a proper position, and Steve had his legs crossed. And one of the, I don't know what his title is, but a man who was part of the clergy came by with a stick and made him straighten out his legs. So this was in many ways, including that one, a very instructive trip. Now I mentioned that we did meet some Americans there. And we're very much of the American presence, including, of course, the American University of Armenia. We met with Ambassador John Evans. And he and I have become friends. We're not really close, but we do keep in touch. He at that time was already sort of a marked man because he had dared to use the word genocide when speaking to an Armenian American group in California. He did so, I believe, justifiably in terms of what actually happened and what the term genocide means according to the Genocide Convention, but evidently not justifiably in terms of what he was authorized or not authorized to do by the Department of State. And it did more or less end, not suddenly, but it did end his career in diplomacy. However, He was awarded by the Armenian Association of America at a ceremony in Cambridge. He was awarded the Henry Morgenthau Award for Meritorious Public Service by that organization. I was privileged to attend that, and it was a very, very meaningful event. So I do admire his courage, and I know that others have done so as well. Now, to conclude, I would like to say just a few things about my experience in America with regard to Armenia. I am a diplomatic historian, so I do know about, for example, Henry Cabot Lodge, the senator from Massachusetts, very much responsive to Armenian Christians in Massachusetts. He was a senator. That was a time there already had been the Hamidian massacres in the late 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century as well. And he was supportive, actually, of the establishment of an Armenian state. However, he opposed the Covenant of the League of Nations, which Woodrow Wilson was proposing, which would have required, under Article 10, that any member of the League of Nations would be obligated to support and maintain and defend the territorial integrity of every member state. And Henry Cabot Lodge, he was what I've called in my classes a great power nationalist. He was not an isolationist, even though he appointed U.S. membership in the League of Nations. He thought that was unrealistic and a bridge too far. Those concerns, that debate continues in American foreign policy in ways I think I probably don't need to spell out at all. My more direct, immediate, real-time experience with regard to Armenians in the United States is through the remarkable Armenian students I have known at the Fletcher School. Many of them, most of them in terms of numbers, the Tibetan scholars who have come to the school, and they'll still be coming. The program continues. They're there for about a 6-month period for what is, in effect, a kind of compressed version of the Fletcher curriculum. However, we have had Armenian students who have come as regular students, so to speak, for the usual 2-year Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy degree. 2 of them I happened to see at reunion weekend a couple of weeks ago. Vigan Sargsyan, who was Minister of Defense of Armenia, before that assistant to the president, and his wife Luzine, who was in my course in political geography at Fletcher, along with another student from Armenia at that time. Earlier at Fletcher, Rafe Hovhannisyan was a student of mine, and he became later, following the earthquake in Armenia, which brought him from the United States, from California, where he's from. His father was a professor at UCLA who wrote probably the standard book on the first Armenian Republic. Rafi became Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia as well. He is another really significant Fletcher graduate who has had a significant effect in the history of the Armenian nation. So there is an affinity, which I have felt personally. It's an affinity based on history, knowledge of history, shared history. It's based on religion, though I haven't talked about that, but I do know that Armenia was the first state to establish itself as a Christian country. I was brought up a Lutheran and now belong to an Episcopal church, which I attend in Wellesley, where I sing in the choir. It's part of a large part of the, broadly speaking, Western tradition. In fact, it's arguably universal. That's very important for Armenia. I mean, clearly, this church, which I look forward to actually seeing on the inside sometime, is part of that connection. And it's also based, and this is what I would especially want to emphasize this evening, it's also based on education. And maybe, with the challenge that is being posed by our own government to institutions of the higher learning, most particularly my own alma mater, Harvard University, right here in Cambridge, it may be that it will be possible to continue programs like your organization, CYSCA's Armenia Schools program. And maybe the educational exchanges and professional exchanges under the congressionally sponsored Open World program can continue as well. You've given me a wonderful opportunity to share with you some thoughts about this subject. And I was thinking about how I might conclude. And when I was driving here this evening, I thought, the word citizen comes from the word city. So you, as citizens of Cambridge and Greater Cambridge, Belmont, Watertown, Winchester, Wellesley, other towns around, you're all citizens. And you're not only sisters, you're brothers as well. So I would like to thank you all as sisters and brothers of this larger fraternity and sorority between these two major cities of the world on different continents. Thank you. Shnor hakal.
Thank you very much, Professor Erickson. We have something for you.
Oh, that's nice.
It's not a pizza.
Oh, that's beautiful. Armenian folk, arts, culture, and identity. I see Mount Yerevan in the background. Mount Ararat, excuse me. Oh, wait, I didn't mention we went to the Ararat brandy factory as well. And one quick story about that. One of my former colleagues had been there earlier, and he was given brandy of various ages, you know, one 7-year-old one, and then one that was maybe 10 years old. And he said, oh, that's much better. And then he was given another one. It was the 5-year-old one. He said, oh, that's really great. That's absolutely the best. But I know Winston Churchill used to drink Armenian brandy, actually, and had evidently quite a large supply of it, which he drank, I guess, almost any hour of the day. So anyway, I can visualize seeing Mount Ararat, you know, in the distance when I was in Yerevan.
This is a book co-authored by a former board member of CYSCA, Nancy Sweezy.
Oh, yes, I know her name.
You've heard it?
Yeah.
Yes, and we'd be very happy.